Yeah, I know. Yeah. He's done a bunch of neighborhood groups. It's is aware of the public participation policy, or that members of the public are aware of the Salem School Committee public participation policy. We would like to hear from members of the public on issues that affect the school district and are within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. Spanish interpretation is available for anyone who needs it. Should any member of the Salem community wish to participate in public during the meeting, you can click on the link at the salem.com calendar for this meeting. I would, Mr. Fleming, your motion to open the public hearing.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Fleming to open the public hearing on the proposed FY23 budget, seconded by Mr. Cruz. All those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. This is an opportunity for members of the public to offer comment on the proposed budget. Perhaps I could ask either Dr. Reich or Mr. Lai just to give a brief summary of what's proposed. I know we just tackled this in the earlier meeting, so a brief summary would be in order at this time.
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor, and looking forward to seeing what comments there may be on the budget. Our revised budget proposal, of which we provided a full budget booklet on Thursday, which is online. We also have hard copies for anybody that is looking for a hard copy. But our revised budget proposal is a $68,597,963 proposal, which is an increase from FY22 of $2,150,045, which is a 3.2% increase over FY22. And then less the additional state aid of $150,000, our proposal would be 3%. And so we again, I just want to reiterate that our proposal, we think, is aligned to our values and the priorities we've laid out as a school district. The presentation we gave 2 school committee meetings ago sort of details the alignment to the work that we've tried to do relative to our priorities, also to maintain some of the key investments not post-pandemic, but in pandemic that we've invested in over the last few years. And we do think that this proposal helps maintain the integrity of what we're trying to do. It doesn't compromise, key programs, initiatives, staff, and resources that we think are necessary to deliver a high quality experience for young people in the upcoming school year. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. If there are members of the public who'd like to offer any comment on the proposed budget, you may do so at this time. You may approach the podium, give us your name and address for the record. If there are any online comments, we can recognize those as well.
So we have 2 submissions for online comment.
Perfect.
Not on the panel, but I can allow the other ones.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Jeff, we can hear you. If you wouldn't mind, can you state your name and address for the record?
Sure. My name is Jeff Millar, and I live at 29 Boardman Street. I have 2 Salem Public Schools students, both at Carlton Elementary right now, one of whom's going to be off to Collins next year. I'm a little disappointed that we seem to be kicking the can down the road a little bit on what I think needs to be a really difficult discussion about priorities. I think part of the reason we're in this position is contracts were agreed to, and the school committee did not go seek a supplemental budget adjustment when those contracts came in more expensive than they were planned for. So now we hear a number of 4.6% originally, which really wasn't 4.6% based on what the budget should have read for this year. And it looks like we're going to do the same thing again next year. I think it's very bad practice to pay next year expenses out of this year funds just so we don't have to have that conversation. I know that you have been told that there's just no money available. Right now, the proposed school budget is the only proposed city budget that anybody's had a chance to even look at. I'm guessing that when the rest of the city budget, proposed budget is published, there will be multiple departments that receive increases that are well above 4%. If you look through last year's, there were probably a dozen that exceeded that, some in the double digits, one almost in the triple digits. I hope you all listened to Ms. Delai when she said that next year is going to be even tougher. And I'll say one more time, I'm disappointed that we're not going to have the conversation now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Millar. Any other comments from, did you say there was one more, Jensen?
There was one more submitted. They are not on the attendee list.
Is this somebody that submitted comments you're going to read, or just
No,
they're not here? Okay. Again, any members of the public who are here who want to offer comments on the proposed budget may do so at this time. I would open it up to committee members who want to offer any comment, and then offer a motion to close the public hearing. Ms. Campbell?
I'm sure. I'm just going to loosely repeat what I said in the initial one for those that weren't here before. I'm sorry, now you have to hear me a second time. Do you want to?
But Ms. Campbell, do you want to hold and we'll allow the member of the
Yeah,
public to
that's fine.
speak first? Yeah.
I wasn't planning to speak, so I don't.
No tenía pensado hablar.
That's our interpretation. I sort of want to echo what Mr. Millar said. I'm really concerned about,
Quería decir lo que había el señor Velar.
attended all of the subcommittee meetings and the meetings here, and Ms. Delai has mentioned several times that this is a one-time fix. It's not going to work next year. We're going to have the same problem next year. It's going to be exacerbated next year. I've heard Ms. Cornell kind of echo that, and I'm worried that we're not dealing with this now.
Y
And that's all. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Are you okay with the technology budget?
Ms. Campbell?
I think there's somebody else.
Oh.
No, you get.
Go ahead, go ahead.
It's a public hearing.
It's a sound tactic. I'm just giving time for people to come up if they want.
Ms. Napier-Kowski?
My daughter's in college now, and my son is gonna be a junior at Salem High School. And I've been. I can't help you with that.
Sorry.
First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I know this is just a really huge, it's, almost $70 million huge. And so the piece that I'm about to speak about is about, this much of that, $70 million. And I think it's wonderful that the pre-K is growing. We have two programs that are growing. There's a 0.4 current teacher that's a full-time teacher that's 0.4 instrumental music that is needed at one elementary school for the pre-K. And I think it's wonderful that that program is growing and we need to fill that. But we're not filling that. We're filling it by taking away from another part of our program that's growing, and really part of the social emotional learning. I can't even describe for you how important our music program has been to our students. I mean, for a long time, but the last 2 years, we have really proven ourselves. And I hope that there might be some miracle that we could save that 0.4. And I know it needs to move that elementary school, but if there's some other way to keep that in the budget, it would be really great to help us with scheduling. We're working on scheduling right now. It's really tight. And I appreciate all that you do, the hours and Mary, the amount of time. Again, this little tiny piece of this, if there's any way to save that, I think it would be really wonderful for our music program K-12. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Napier-Kowski. Any other members of the public?
Should I start again and give people some more time? Just want to see you get your stuff done this time. Last chance, anybody? I'm about to start talking again. Okay. I just wanted to sort of echo a little bit about what I said about my experience on finance subcommittee. I think that there was some consideration about how to bring this budget out of subcommittee. Although I appreciate everything that Ms. July and Dr. Dreich have done, have not fully been in agreement with the amount of money that we're seeing coming out of it. And a lot of that is what Ms. July spoke to in terms of the unfortunate solution that we have in front of us is to kick the can down the road. And I would like for us to be able to have that conversation around at what point are we in better position to absorb that additional expenditure? Is it here in FY23 or is it in FY24? Because the problem isn't really going away. And I think the hoping for state aid, it didn't help last year. It's not helping for this fiscal year. And I as much as I would love to see them come through, I would like for us to have a different solution on the books that doesn't, again, kick the can down the road. And the contractual increases that we're seeing, when I spoke last time, I didn't have the exact average. The average over the past 4 fiscal years, not counting this upcoming one, was $1.5 million. Our current contractual increases is $2.3 million. So again, it makes it look as though it's a much more significant increase than it is. If you factor in those contractual obligations, it is a budget cut. And I think that's important for us to acknowledge and to name that this is a decrease in funding below level service. And I understand that there are additional factors at play, but as school committee members, I feel as though we have an obligation to advocate for our students who've had so much interrupted and unfinished learning over the past now 3 school years. How do we make sure that, yes, eventually we need to right size, but we also need to make sure that they're getting all of the supports that they need heading into this upcoming school year. And I think it is important for us to have an honest conversation about the fact and again, I'm paraphrasing what I said before, that our kids have been hardest hit, some of the most challenged by the difficulties we faced in COVID. They've carried the burden themselves. Like they have been, you know, impacted by the shutdowns, by the interruptions, by the quarantine procedures, by being in and out so often due to COVID. That they're the ones who've shouldered that. And so I think it's important for us to start to have a conversation around what amount of the Recovery Act do we owe to our students to allow them a chance to recover that learning. And unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to have that conversation until now. With a vote scheduled this Friday, I think it's important for us to try and at least navigate that or have a conversation around it, because as of right now, I'm not comfortable with our fiscal responsibility to kick it down the road another year.
Any other comments or questions from members of the committee regarding the proposed FY23 school budget? Dr. Pangala?
So when we realized that we were going to be, short of that 4.6% that was originally requested, Dr. Zweig had conversations with all of us, and I just wanted to be clear about where I stand on that. My position was that I do see this year as something of an anomaly where we have the first year of these contracted, collective bargaining agreements that have increased that cost substantially. Layered into the fact that we have essentially one-time expenses due to the pandemic. It's not exactly one time, I guess, but it's not necessarily going to be reoccurring over the long term. So I was supportive of finding a way to buy us a year to look at our budget, look at our prioritizations, and have a strategic and long-term conversation about how we do strategize going forward, knowing that we are going to have to prioritize, knowing that we are seeing declining enrollments. So I think that the solution that was developed, although yes, it is a one-time solution, and yes, it will not, absolutely will not work next year. It does give us the time that we need to be thoughtful in that conversation. And I'm glad that we're starting that conversation now, and we've been having that conversation. So, and I really appreciate the creation of the special education fund. I think that's a really smart move, and I'm glad that we're doing that. So I just want to be clear about where I stand on that, and I'm interested in continuing the discussion though, because I think there is a lot to consider here.
Thanks. Other members of the committee? Ms. Manning?
I certainly would say that I think it will behoove us to take a good look at the process for next year and perhaps have the budget retreat that we haven't had in a while. But I do look at this year as an anomaly for all the different reasons that all the different people are saying. But it all boils down to it's an anomaly of a year. And I'm not looking at it as kicking the can down the road. I'm looking at it as finding a solution to an anomaly of a year with some increased need for students and staff and families and schools and everybody, but also the city. But I do think that well, there's no point to belaboring this. These are the facts. We didn't have enough money when the state amount fell through. That was not something that we expected. Folks in central office have figured out a way to deal with that. It doesn't involve, moving, some of the expenses to next year, but it does get us a budget for this year that I think is going to do what we need to do for our students and our staff. And it does buy us some time to figure out what happened with the state, to figure out how we can perhaps do a better, smoother job on a budget in another year. I mean, this was not the year that anybody had extra, time or expectations to put into, anything beyond, I think, what we all did. We all did the best job I think that people can do at the time. And next year, we need to do a better job because next year will be different. Next year, hopefully, we'll have, some resolution to the issue of the state cuts. The schools will stabilize a bit more. There were a lot of things that have gone wrong this year that we're making right, and none of them were, I think, our fault, including the state shortfall to us, but all of the things that the schools had to deal with. Everybody deals with these things in a timely fashion, and we're trying to do that. And to me, it's not kicking the can down the road. To me, it's taking care of those of what the opportunities that we have to use to take care of them. And I honestly say I can feel like I'm going to vote for this budget because I feel like we are taking care of our students, we are taking care of our staff, and that ultimately takes care of our families to some degree. And yeah, am I worried about next year? I am, but it's not prohibitive worry that's going to keep me from doing what I need to do this year. I think fiducially, it's responsible on my part to vote for the budget and get it and help to pass it. And to early on in the summer, as folks have raised this year, this evening, start that discussion early. And maybe a better way to do this. But for this year, I think this is the best way to do it. The best budget that we're going to come up with. And we did the best job that we could, and I have no problem voting for it. I think that we're going to do what we need to do for our schools.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. Any other comments or questions, Mr. Cruz?
And Mayor, just for point of clarification here, prior to, I think you're taking a brief break there. I'd proposed doing an earlier retreat in the summer as we've done in years past. We've had 2 retreats, and I think it would be important for us to kind of get current with respect to some elements of the budget process. And then I think I'm just going to add to some of the things that I've heard Ms. Manning and Dr. Pangalo state with respect to the process. I think moving forward, it's great that we're going to perhaps buy ourselves some more time. But I do think that the process this year was a little bit different than what we were accustomed to with respect to the budget. I think as we're having these conversations, it's going to be critically important for the committee to get access to school leaders as we've had in years past, the full committee. We've done that with our principals, and I know Dr. Carboni helped plan that particular section, and I did think that that was really valuable. And I just want to commend my colleagues on the finance committee, number one, for their advocacy for centering the needs of kids with respect to this budget. And I do think that one of the things that I put out there is we're in the midst of 2 more contract negotiations with 2 of our other unions. And I think from a value perspective as a individual committee member and the chair of personnel, my priority is doing right by those educators as well that are serving our kids. So, I do want to make sure that as we put forward budgets, that we're meeting our contractual obligations to the people that are serving our school children. And so we do have those 2 other negotiations on the horizon. So the urgency around getting this right this time around, even with some of the proposed one-time fixes, it's going to be even more pressing next year as we see some further increases that come along. So I do hope that we can set a regular cadence to discuss this in a transparent way so that we can really bring folks into this process, because I do think that this year was a little bit different than what we were accustomed to, but nonetheless, the end result here, a creative solution, an opportunity to still discuss and have some hard conversations. But I'm recognizing, my colleagues and members of the public certainly want us to put that all on the table. I think where we're hampered is state budget doesn't necessarily align well to what the municipalities required to do to put things forward. And then we still have, I think, 4 days to make some shifts if something was going to occur. So it's not a lot of time, and it just didn't work out this way this time. But I do think, to the point that Dr. Pangalo made, for me, this isn't, I think I have some more questions after this evening in the revised budgetary proposal. But I do think, buying ourselves some more time for this conversation so that we don't rush with respect to the future projections and the fiscal picture for the public schools is critically important.
Thanks, Mr. Cruz. Anybody else? Ms. Fanning?
I just want to clarify what Mr. Cruz was talking about, the school committee and then the interaction with school leaders, the principals, and the district administration. Actually, the subcommittee, we did have access. We had, I think, 3 meetings where 7 folks came in this evening and met with us individually. And, it was very helpful. Certainly could, would like to be longer, but always like to have a longer conversation, but we did. We had an opportunity to ask questions, I think it went well, and we appreciated it. And I know, I won't speak for the committee. I know I appreciated the opportunity to do that. I think in the past, I do remember, and you may be referring to this, when we had, the school committee had, round tables, the whole room was set up, and the principals, we did like a round robin, several, couple, 3 or 4 hours, and that was a whole different way of interacting with principals and district folks. And it would maybe be able to think to bring that back as an idea too, not necessarily around budget time, just as a way to get some, communication both ways.
Thanks, Ms. Manning. Any other comments or questions? Guess I'll just offer a couple of comments, and apologies if I missed some of the comments earlier when I had to step out. I'm a little disappointed that we've characterized what we're doing as kicking things down the road. I think we're trying to do the best we can with the marshaling the resources that we have. I know, just for point of clarification, the city is, I think, always looked at city and school together. Like, we really value trying to better understand how we can support the work that we're doing in schools, because it's very much the most important work we're doing, but it's not the only work we do as a city. We still have to do other things. And so how we approach the budget has never been sort of an us versus them. I sense a little bit of that happening now. So I hope, we can get past that, because I don't think that's really healthy for our community, especially at a time when we're spending, over $20,000 per student. We have some of the lowest class sizes. And frankly, the last 2 years of school budgets have been returned well over $1 million. Like, there was significant float. Some of that was due to COVID. Some of that was due to information that Ms. Delai shared around out of district placements and special ed budgets. But I hope it shows and demonstrates that we have provided the resources that we need, with enough to make sure that we were never shortchanging kids. There was always opportunities for more. There's so much of what we support for our schools that is not built into the budget that we're adopting. The 4.6% increase is was roughly $3 million. The amount of state aid that we're getting, new state aid overall for everything, is projected to be $300,000. That's a significant drop from what we need to support city operations, schools, and the work that we're doing. When you're returning $1 million on a regular basis the last couple of years, we're able to think about how can we creatively use that, not so that we can avoid hard conversations, so that we have time to plan for what are we going to be doing long term. We've expanded early ed. We have a number of our early ed costs built into one-time resources as well with ESSER. We need to think about that. The city is going to be tapping more into our unused levy capacity, because we have needs both here in the schools and beyond. The initial number that we looked at was a 2.25% increase. This was after really scratching our head to understand what is going on with the state, this Chapter 70 number. That's $1.5 million more. So July 1st, that would be devoting $1.5 million more. We worked together, I think, cooperatively to move that up to 3.2%. And the 4.6% number was $3 million. So we found a way to pull a rabbit out of a hat to make sure that we weren't cutting teachers and staff in schools and raising class sizes, or really making drastic decisions that frankly we haven't planned for this year, because we're using some of the unspent resources from this year. Do we want to do that every year? No, of course not. But 2 years in a row, we've returned significant revenues. We haven't fully used our circuit breaker. Like, those are dollars that we need to marshal together to help us close the gap this fiscal year at an extraordinary time. Like, we need to be banding together to go to the state to fix this Chapter 70 formulaic issue. It is wrong that we're getting $300,000. Every other community, Gateway City, is getting significantly more. And even communities around us who are not gateway cities are getting significantly more. The whole value of the Student Opportunity Act was to make sure that economically disadvantaged students were tended to. We should be outraged. That's where we should be. If we're going to be outraged, we're going to be upset. If we want to really tackle something and marshal something together, we should be working in collaboration to address that. Instead, it feels a little bit like we're, unhappy with the process, which I understand. And if there's more that we can do during a process. We've had budget retreats. This is frankly Dr. Reich's first real budget, because we've been in a COVID pandemic the entire time. The budget retreats have always been helpful for us to understand, hey, what's happening on the state landscape? What are some of the opportunities? Where are the challenges? I just came off a 3-hour retreat with the city council. It really helps set the table for what we're up against. I think if we had to do things over again, that would be a welcome, add on to the process, especially for new members who haven't been through this before. It certainly can be, it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And I stand ready to help and do that. I don't know how we missed it this year, just busy, I'm gonna say. But the idea that we were gonna take ARPA dollars to sort of plug a hole, it's the same issue, guys. Whether we're using unspent resources from this year or ARPA dollars, those are all one-time revenues. So none of that is the answer. I'm really grateful, by the way, that we put budget heads together. I want to commend our finance director, Anna Friedman, and Mary, superintendent, and myself for saying, okay, how are we going to solve this? How are we going to be creative so that, not that we're avoiding hard conversations, so that we have the time to plan appropriately, hopefully to work on getting this formula addressed. I'm not giving up on that. None of us should be giving up on that. We should be really working harder more than ever to do that. And then also to think about the things that we already have. We have a fair amount of one-time revenues built into this budget for things like early ed, for other expenditures beyond what we've talked about today. We need to be working towards a plan. I know that we're going to have to tap our levy more for those years as we come forward. That's certainly on my think about my forecasting. So no, we can't hit it even harder this year, knowing that the transgressions that are going to happen going forward are going to be meaningful. I think the last piece I would just say is, we have always worked to, resolve these issues in a way that's collaborative and cooperative. We are providing for our students. I think we're going to be doing that again. We have found ways to ensure that our kids and our students and staff had what they needed. We had excess capacity last year to help pay for some of these funding contractual increases. We certainly would never not fund those adequately moving forward. But there isn't a whole picture that I think oftentimes the school committee doesn't get that, fortunately or unfortunately, I do. There's $2 million in capital requests that have been made by the schools this year. 2 million. We're probably going to fund about 1 million of it, by the way. Like you probably didn't even see some of that. That's all on our budget. The cost of health insurance is up. The cost of retirement pensions are up. The cost of debt service is up. This is one of the highest years we have. There's a real pinch point with debt service. We're trying to do as much pay as you go from a city budget overall perspective. There's nothing that we charge back to schools for all the overhead, munis, the accounting programs. Lots of school districts do that. I mean, a lot. We don't do that. In our community, we put schools first. That's what this budget does. It's not without challenges. And we certainly have some challenges moving forward we're going to have to work on together. But I would hope that we could adopt this budget, be grateful that we are in a position, frankly, that we can spend over 20,000 per student, that we're not looking at reducing class sizes, cutting staff, being in a position to take back things that we want to advance, whether it's vocational programs or early ed. And we need to plan for that moving forward. And I appreciate that. And there's more work to do on that front. But I feel like I have really, as someone who's been in this seat for a number of years, have really led the effort to make sure we have resources so we can invest in schools. And where we're getting shortchanged this year is frankly the commitment from the state. And if we can work together to try and address that, by the way, problem solved, or certainly made much easier to address if we were getting anything near what we think we're entitled to, which is about another $3.4 million. We're in decent shape. We're still going to have to hit the levy for early ed and some of the things that we know are coming down the pike. But we're trying to think through this and be mindful of impacts to kids. So it's not avoiding a hard conversation. It's being smart about the use of the resources that we have that we're not using in this budget that we can put together to help us tend to what we think is an extraordinary year, in the hopes that we can both help on the Chapter 70 piece and plan for some of the expenses we have that are coming off of ESSER and the like. We still have, 8 million, 5 million in ESSER.
Yeah, we're about 8 million left.
8.5 million remaining in ESSER dollars. So, we're trying not to plug too many holes with that, but there are some that are in here. And so those are some of the conversations we need to have going forward. I'm grateful for all the work with the Finance Committee. I think we should be working together to try and, resolve whether it's differences of opinion or ways we support kids. But I don't think we should be questioning certainly the commitment of the city to do that, because I think we really have demonstrated a strong desire to make sure our schools are first. That comes ahead of police and fire and DPS, and trust me, those leaders let me know it on occasion, but that's our value here. And so we're doing the things that we need to be successful this year. And we need to be mindful of that as we go forward and work together to address it. So thank you to the Finance Committee and to frankly everyone who put the time in I know there was a lot of heartache and effort, and we've tried to get as high as we can with our 3.2%. And I'm hopeful that we can find some long-term solutions as we think about the years ahead. Ms. Cornell.
I just want to reiterate what you're saying about the commitment of the city to our schools. I mean, having kids in public schools for 14 years now, I'm always quite grateful that we devote the kind of resources that we do to our schools. And that's a credit to you, Mayor, and to every iteration of the school committee over the 14 years that I've been in the district. I also wanted to echo Mary's point about the great conversations that we had with district leaders. Those were really helpful to me as a new school committee member, and I felt like I really understood the needs of the various departments. And so I think that's where having a budget retreat, pretty soon would be helpful, because, to this point about the us versus them thing, I hope that that's not sort of how I was communicating that. But I will say I did not feel as though I fully understood the issues that the city was facing. I understood what the district needed. I understood what the district leaders needed. But that's the piece of the conversation that I was not privy to. And so as somebody who's sort of talking through the budget and proposing that we take it to the full committee meeting, I couldn't say that I had all my questions answered. And so I'm particularly as a new school committee member, looking forward to that budget retreat for those planning purposes, so that I do understand the full picture. So that when somebody says it's this number, I can say, well, why can't it be this number, and understand what the answer to that question is.
Appreciate that. I mean, I think we all know there are more expenses than just schools, and so happy to be able to provide some more details on that. Mr. Cruz?
And it's not really budget related, but to that end, I do think it's really important beyond the budget retreat that we do have some more opportunities for cows this summer for Ms. Cornell's benefit. I do recall coming onto the committee and having way more opportunities, and even Dr. Pangallo, to really talk about how we work together as a body. I think that is really important given the dynamics that sometimes occur throughout a school year. So I do think we have quite a bit to unpack over the summer, but I'm hoping not only can we set a retreat, but we can also set a few cows so that we can have all members in a place of comfort when it comes to these discussions, and that we're getting the appropriate time to tackle a number of issues. I do think that's part of the reason perhaps that we're seeing some of the challenges that have come up this time around is just with the pandemic. We haven't spent as much time talking about our larger vision beyond some of the strategic planning that we did alongside Dr. Shrike. So I would just advocate for 2 retreats this year, but then also some more cows to discuss, I think, particular topics that we just haven't dug into as deeply as we want to.
Thanks, Mr. Cruz. Ms. Campbell?
Thank you for some of the additional information around the city budget. I think, for example, that was the first I'd heard about how you're looking to fund pre-K in the future. And so that does provide additional context, and I'm grateful to have it. I do wish we'd had the opportunity, like Ms. Cornell stated, to have it before. In terms of I just want to address the kick the can down the road comment and kind of provide some context. I'm specifically reflecting on the slide from Ms. DeLine and Dr. Drake that specifically says it's the last one, without additional state support, FY24 will be even more challenging. And so that is something that's been presented to us in subcommittee. That's something that is listed right here. Ms. DeLine spoke to it tonight. Dr. Drake spoke to it tonight. I think that there is a balance. Yes, it's an anomaly. Yes, it's a one-time situation to have to deal with. However, if it doesn't get resolved this year, it does kick down the road to next year. And so I just feel like I understand that, and I am equally as outraged about the funding. I don't demonstrate that here because it's not going to resolve anything here. If there's more that I can do to be a good advocate, I engage with my elected officials as a resident of Salem quite frequently. So I try to do my best to advocate for it. If there's more that we can do, I am all for it. I live the consequences of underfunding. I have lived them as a public educator for the past 15 years. I know it
Not
hurts.
this year.
Even still this year, we did receive more, but even still, it's not enough. And I understand that the state's outdated funding formula, it has a dramatic impact for everyone. I just think we also have to acknowledge that hope is not a strategy. Hoping that the state's going to resolve it doesn't help if they don't. And we've now have $600,000 to $800,000 of special education tuition from this year that we have to figure out for next year. And so in terms of kicking the can down the road, it's, I guess, a more of a facetious way to say there's a very real reality that our business manager has told us that FY24 will be more challenging. And so if everybody understands that, we are going to work to build a plan for that. I just think we all have to acknowledge that. And that's the reality. And it doesn't mean that people aren't making informed decisions about it, or that maybe it's not the right decision. I'm not making a judgment or value call on people's decision around it. But I do think it is fair to say that there is a passing along to the next fiscal year, and some people doing so knowingly, hoping there's going to be state funding, assuming we're going to right size a little bit more, that will be strategic, but there is an element of that. And I think we have to acknowledge that. From my own personal perspective, it makes me uneasy because I haven't sat in on these funding conversations with the state. I don't know much about how that's going to change or what it's looking like. I think there was a lot of promise all throughout this year, and that we've been very disappointed by this year's budget. So from a practical perspective, I feel like it would be fair to say we might be in this exact same position next year, having felt hopeful that we're going to see a change and not seeing the change we wanted to see. So from that respect, I feel like it's fair to say there is an element of kicking the can down the road. That's all I wanted to say
And
about
just
that.
one thing about just municipal finance that I think is important. If we have money that's being returned that the school district is not using, as we have for 2 years in a row, I can't touch that next year.
Yeah.
So this is frankly a creative way of using money. I understand your point around, oh, well, it creates more of a hardship the following year, but without it, we'd be creating that hardship this year. I can't access those dollars. So it falls to the bottom. It doesn't get certified till free cash much later in the fiscal year. And so we would be, in my estimation, creating a hardship this year when those dollars are ultimately going to drop back. Why not put them to use so that we don't have to create hardships and layoffs and all the really hard calls that we would need to make. And I'm doing that. I mean, I think we're all doing that, to your point, with our eyes wide open. This isn't, hey, we're kicking the can down the road. So sad, too bad. Let the next people have to deal with it. We're aware that this is a challenge we have to face, just as we've got one-time revenue baked into the current. Well, it's not in the budget because it's outside the budget to pay for a number of things that are happening in the school district. This, certainly could be a longer conversation, but I don't want to give anybody the impression that, yeah, we're doing this kind of willy-nilly, right? We're doing this because we don't want to lay people off and impact kids this year. And I certainly want to lay the blame at this Chapter 70 formula. We are going to have a lot more pain if we're looking at an increase of the magnitude we're seeing this year and next year. So we have got to creatively get that addressed because we're not going to have any float. We've had float for 2 years, plus the circuit breaker amount. That's the return of revenues that come back. That wasn't fully used. Like, it's not okay just to have float in your budget either. So we also need to be looking at right sizing things to make sure, we're lean, not too lean, where it's going to cause a May Day surprise, but responsible with taxpayer resources.
Right, I understand all that. I guess I'm just trying to clarify that, sure, you can say I'm kicking the can down willy-nilly, but there's also an element of acknowledging that there still may be a problem to come. And again, I'm looking at the budget presentation. It's not my own opinion. I'm just noting it. And I'm not saying that there's the added, I don't think anyone here is saying, oh, we'll figure it out next year. It's going to be someone else's problem next year. I don't think anybody is doing that. I feel like it has to get noted.
I know, would we rather have the pain now and to have those resources that's dropped to free cash? Like, that doesn't feel like to me like a good strategy. That's all. So, those are the choices. Make the impact now, or creatively use those dollars, marshal them together to strengthen the services we know that we need.
I mean, I don't understand the budget landscape of the city as well as you do.
Right.
There very well may be a third option I'm not aware of. I'm just saying, I don't think it's fair to narrow it and just say those are the two options. There is an additional option where you do all of those things and there's an additional contribution in order to not have to create the fiscal issue for the following year. There is a third option. Again, I don't know the city layout. I would love to learn more about it. And I'm just saying that it's not quite as black and white as those two options. There could be one.
Any other comments or questions from committee members? Last chance for public comments.
All as long as I could, guys.
I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing on the proposed FY23 budget. Motion made by Mr. Fleming. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Cornell. All those in favor? All those opposed, the ayes have it. And I think we have public comments on here, but I think we have exhausted our public comments. So I will just entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Mr. Fleming, seconded by Mr. Cruz. And just with a quick reminder on that, we have our budget meeting on Friday at
4 o'clock
via
virtually.
Zoom, right? Via Zoom, just so that we're all clear. All those in favor of adjournment, all those opposed, the ayes have it. We stand adjourned at 8:48 PM. Thanks, everyone.
Has anyone ever voted against an adjournment? Has anyone been like?
I want to stay.
Deeply like to just hang?
Yes.
Yeah. No, and don't be the first either, okay?
Maybe I'll just try it, see what happens.